guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. Steely Dan. 9 records, 9 studio records. We're going to rank them all here. We're going to talk about Steely Dan, talk about Mr. Fagen and Mr. Becker, and the 40 to 50 to 60 musicians that are on all these albums. Let's get into Steely Dan. Let's rank the records. The bottom 2 are fairly easy. I think if you every single album ranking that I've ever looked at on Steely Dan, like it's always kind of these 2. But 7 to 1 are so the difference between 7 and 1. I can't think of a ranking I've done, any artists, where the difference between like the number 7 and the number 1 in the ranking is so kind of narrow as far as quality goes. It's just, and then when you get in, the 4, 3, 2, 1, it's razor thin. So yeah, maybe that's one of the reasons I've kind of put off this ranking for a while, because it's so hard to differentiate sometimes because there's incredible consistency, I think, with Steely Dan, especially in that 70s run, right? And they're one of those bands that if you really dig them, you kind of dig everything they do. It's a very sophisticated sound, and a lot of Steely Dan fans, they're sort of proudly snooty. It's like they I think they're proud of their status as sort of like I said, snooty, really. They kind of pride themselves, or the band, on being so meticulous and perfectionists. People love Steely Dan for their production, as much as the music. Obviously, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, get a ton of credit for that. Gary Katz, though, the producer on all those, at least those 70s records, those gems, really deserves some credit as well. Lyrically, I've always found Steely Dan kind of hard to decipher. It's kind of funny. I read a lot about what some of these songs are about. Okay, well, that makes sense after I'm like told, but I don't know if I would ever pick that up just reading the lyrics on their own. But they're great. There's great sarcasm and cynicism. If you like kind of sort of sophisticated, intellectual kind of cynicism, I mean, Steely Dan, those lyrics are for you. So, Fagen and Becker, they met at Bard College in New York, started performing together in various bands, various configurations, but nothing really happened until they kind of move out to LA, right? And then put Steely Dan together. I mean, just look at the band name. It's this Steely Dan is named after the talking dildo in William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch. So there you go. So if you look at the history of Steely Dan, it's really kind of 3 phases, because they started out like as a legit band. There's Fagen and Becker. Fagen on keyboards and singing, and Becker like some guitar and bass. Jeff Skunk Baxter, one of the great guitar players, was in the band as a full member originally. Denny Diaz, also a great guitar player. Jim Hodder on drums. Those first couple of records, it was really sort of that band, although even on those, they had a lot of session guys coming in and sort of supplementing stuff. But really, from the 3rd record into the 4th record, it's all Fagen and Becker, right? And they become this studio duo, and became noted for this clean perfectionism. And a lot of people really dig. Now, I love dirty, gritty, sloppy rock and roll, but you don't go to Steely Dan for that. you sort of go for the other extreme. And if I'm in the mood for that, this just studio perfection. I mean, a lot of these LA session guys and just special guests. I made a partial list here of all the people that have appeared on these 70s Steely Dan albums. Well, Baxter and Diaz kind of came back and played, a lot. Rick Derringer, Hal Blaine, Chuck Rainey, Jim Gordon, Jeff Porcaro, Elliot Randall, Larry Carlton, Michael McDonald, Rick Marotta, Bernard Purdue, Tom Scott, Timothy B. Schmidt, Wayne Shorter, Clyde King, Vanetta Fields, Shirley Matthews, etc., etc., etc. I mean, there's so many people played on these records, and then so they their kind of final record in that initial, the classic run. They it was Gaucho, 1980, I think, and then they, for all intents and purposes, kind of break up and go off and do their own things. There's a surprising reunion in the mid '90s, and funny enough, they come back with a live album. This "Alive in America" from when was that? I can't read it very well. The mid '90s, I think. Um, Very good, very good. And I say surprising because they stopped touring in the early '70s to really sort of focus on this studio perfectionism. It's kind of interesting that they sort of announced their return, so to speak, with a live album. But it's very well done. It's very good. I like it. But and then they surprisingly recorded two more studio albums. In the, I think the dates were 2000, 2003. Yeah, and then that was it. And then kind of kept touring, and Walter Becker kind of had some health issues, and of course, yeah, died at some point in the 2000 teens. And Donald Fagen has sort of continued on with the Steely Dan name, at least live. So that's kind of how it's been, how it's been done. How do you describe their music? I mean, it's dark, it's cynical, it's humorous, all kinds of innuendos in those lyrics. Superlative musicianship, right? I mean, people really listen for this production, this amazing playing by all these people they have on these records. But great songs. I mean, don't overlook the songwriting. A lot of people focus on all this great studio session stuff, but the songwriting is amazing. Mixing genres, rock and a very heavy jazz influence, R&B, soul, even a little folk in there. I mean, it's just kind of everything. Well, all right, let's get into it, shall we? Let's rank these records. There's 9 total. We'll get through these early 2 pretty quick. And I think every single ranking I've ever seen, this has been on the bottom. And it is for me too. I'm not going to buck the trend just to do it. But their final record. All right, Everything Must Go from 2003. You're at about 2.5 stars. I got to say, if this is your worst album in your whole discography, you've done pretty well. It's a fine record, but it's just, it sounds like Steely Dan. I mean, it's kind of unmistakable, but nothing really jumps out at me like classic Steely Dan. And I guess it's notable, has the only Walter Becker lead vocal, right, with Slang of Ages. But there's really nothing on here that jumps at me. So, and of course, the number 8, kind of the one I see in almost every, although I've seen a few where this was up 1 or 2 more slots. But I have 2000's Two Against Nature. This was their, the kind of the first of these 2 kind of comeback studio albums. Surprised a lot of people. This welcome return after 20 years being gone. It really does sound like they're sort of picking up where they left off. So, sort of a funny side note, right? This shocked everyone, probably including these guys. This won the Grammy, right, for Album of the Year over Kid A. Radiohead's Kid A. It's not better than Kid A, but anyway, it's kind of funny. There's good stuff on here. It sounds like Steely Dan, but a little more laid back tempo, mid tempo stuff. Not as many surprises as during their kind of classic period, but it is uniformly good. I think Jack of Speed, Cousin Dupree are great. I really like the 8-minute closer, West of Hollywood. Some great saxophone on that one. Good stuff. All right, so let's get into the meat, right? Let's get into that 70s run. And again, the difference between 7 and 1, is narrow. Is narrow. Something's got to be in 7. And some of you guys might be surprised. This might be the first hot take. Some of you guys might be a little surprised what I have in 7, because I have seen this very high up on some lists. But for me, it's always been kind of down here. That's where I do have Pretzel Logic. I got Pretzel Logic from 1974. Now I'm up to Two Against Nature would be 3 stars, so I'm up to 3.5 stars here. But this is where I have Pretzel Logic. It's kind of a conscious turn. Their third record, kind of a conscious turn, more jazz. I mean, with a straight cover of Duke Ellington's East St. Louis Toodaloo, right, which is kind of interesting. With sort of more modern instrumentation. Parker's Band, referencing Charlie Parker, right? The rhythm track for Ricky Don't Lose That Number, which is I think their highest charting single, if I remember right. Great song, great song. It was such a great kind of sort of Latin groove to it. Now that groove is so great because it's basically lifted straight from Horace Silver's song for my father. Go listen to Horace Silver's song for my father, and that's Ricky Don't Lose Your Number, at least the rhythm track. But yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. This was sort of the last record where they were at least sort of kind of a partially functioning band, I guess. But there's still a lot of session guys on here. Um, I think the first side is as strong as anything else here. I mean, the first side is really strong. Ricky Don't Lose That Number, then Night by Night, Any Major Dude Will Tell You, Barrytown. I even like the East St. Louis Toodaloo cover. But it's the second side that sort of brings it down to this 7 slot, where they start to experiment with these shorter, like 2-minute things, and some of them just don't grab me. Some of them, if they are good, they're too short, so they never really get going. So the title track is really the only one on the second side that really grabs me, and have that many songs not grab me on a '70s Steely Dan album. That's why Pretzel Logic would be right there. All right, so number 6. This is where I have 1980s Gaucho. Now this would also be about 3.5-star record here. Now that before Gaucho, they'd been kind of releasing records at sort of like a yearly clip, especially once they stopped touring. Kind of once a year there'd be a new Steely Dan record. They kind of labored over this for 2 or 3 years. I think there was some writer's block in there, from what I understand. Walter Becker had really kind of, the drug problems were catching up to him. Well, it's kind of interesting because compare this to Asia, which came before. It's a lot more spacious, a lot more spare. Um, More mellow. Yeah, a lot of people cite this as a key record for yacht rock. Maybe so. I don't know. This used to split opinions. I seem to remember, like, out of those '70s records, this is 1980, but out of those '70s records, Gaucho was always sort of the outlier, for a long time. But I think appreciation has really been growing for this one. Now you need to be in the mood for this, but sometimes it really hits the spot. Sometimes where no other Steely Dan record will. If you're in the mood for Gaucho. Um, and it's so Steely Dan, like obviously the big. Well, there's Babylon Sisters, Third World Man, uh, Time Out of Mind is great, but Hey 19, of course, was the hit off of here. It's so Steely Dan because it's such a catchy tune. The playing is great, but you listen to the lyrics. It basically disguises this really sleazy come on, from this much older man, trying to talk to this much younger girl, about 19 years old. So you listen to those lyrics. They're clever, but they're also quite sleazy. I guess a lot of Steely Dan songs, if you think about it, right? All right. We're already up to 4 stars here in my number 5 spot. And this is where I have Katie Lied, 1975. This is the first record where they really just go all in with all the session guys. It's really just, Fagan and Becker, and then this army of session guys. The first appearance of Michael McDonald on backing vocals. Michael McDonald. Uh, and yeah, it's good. Apparently there were some production issues on this. Actually, I love the album art too. That's pretty cool. Apparently there were some production issues on this. So much so that Becker and Fagan, I find this hard to believe, but like refused to just listen to the final mix because they were so angry about it. I don't know if that's true, but I read that somewhere. You know, this one I think is here for consistency. This the 4 records to come, I think, have higher peaks, but this one is from start to finish just really, really consistent. Everybody's Gone to the Movies is really funky. Love that one. But yeah, I mean the whole thing. I mean, it's hard to pick highlights because this one really is pretty consistent all the way through. Yeah, Black Friday, Bad Sneakers. It's a great, opening 1-2 punch right there. All right, so top 4. This is where yeah, I've got these at 5 stars. All 4 of these. Like I said, if you're into Steely Dan, you're into Steely Dan. I know it's a lot of 4-star records, but each of these four has um, has been my number one at some point. It's crazy. Just really. So I mean, you're talking about the differences between 4, 3, 2, 1. It's razor thin. It can flip all the time. But yeah, so as of right now, in my number 4 spot, I do have Countdown to Ecstasy, 1973. There's no weak tracks. There's no weak tracks on any of these to come. I don't think. The band just tears it up. This may be kind of their most rockin' record. I don't know, maybe the debut, but this they just tear it up on here. You can tell they're gaining some more confidence and more of an identity from this is their second record. So from the debut to this, although you haven't seen the debut yet, so I do love it. Um, the I love the jam on Your Gold Teeth. I think is so good. The guitar work, from Denny Diaz and Jeff Skunk Baxter is killer throughout. I mean, you some of the better known tunes on here. You got Bodhisattva, the Boston Rag, Showbiz Kids. Such great Showbiz Kids is so good. My Old School. Yeah, I mean, not a weak track on here. And again, this in the debut where they really were sort of more of a band, so to speak. All right. So number 3, I do have the debut. Can't Buy a Thrill from '72. 5-star record. Um, for a long time, this was my favorite. These final 2 here, I've just gotten into more recently a lot, but love this record. It's again definitely working as a band. If you want the kind of the most straight ahead sort of Steely Dan as a rock band, maybe it's this. But then you have the single "Do It Again," which doesn't sound like any hit single from the '70s to me. I mean that was it salsa. I don't know what it is, but it's a Latin groove. It's so good. Yeah, kind of a sitar solo from I believe it's Denny Diaz doing that. Now on this record, they did have another vocalist. Of course, it's Donald Fagen on everything else, and Fagen sings on some of these too. But I think the record company didn't think Fagen had a real commercial voice. You got to get used to Fagen's voice. So they had David Palmer on some tunes, and he sings on "Dirty Work." A lot of people kind of downgrade "Dirty Work" a little bit because it doesn't have Fagen singing, but I've always loved "Dirty Work." I think "Dirty Work" is such a catchy song. Even with I think David Palmer does a fine job singing it. I love it. I love Kings. Reeling in the Years. Some of the just absolute tastiest guitar work of the 1970s. Reeling in the Years is and that on Reeling in the Years it's Elliot Randall. Just looking at my notes here. Elliot, you got to keep notes on Steely Dan who's playing what. There's so many musicians on here, but Elliot Randall, just pay close attention to his leads on Reeling in the Years. Just the tastiest tone, the choices. Oh, it's just some of my favorite guitar work of the '70s is on that song. But yeah, no, I not a weak track on here. Yeah, I had tried to maybe bump this down a little bit, but then I put it on today a lot. Just cranked it, and I can't have it any lower than that. Can't love it. All right. Oops. Ah, last 2. Now, some of you guys may be a little surprised that this is this high in my number 2 slot. Because for some reason, I don't understand why. For some reason, in some of these rankings, when you get to the get past the 2 from the 2000s, but get to the '70s, this one often is kind of mid to low in some of these rankings. I've got it in my number 2 slot, and it's been my favorite Steely Dan record at times. So I do have 1976's The Royal Scam. Yeah, I love I love start to finish. I love start all these top 4. I love them start to finish. But it's and I seem to remember it wasn't even reviewed as favorably at the time in some places. I don't get it. Like I don't get why this isn't held up as one of the great Steely Dan records. I don't know. In the comments, maybe you do hold it up too. Let's talk about it. But it's just I don't know. It is a return, So this, when did this come after? It came after Katie lied, so it is a return to some, kind of some longer songs, longer kind of jams. But I mean, with these musicians on here, those jams are wonderful, right? Yeah, and it's interesting. Variety of topics. Kid Charlemagne's probably the most well known song on here. The opener, interesting. It's supposed to be kind of a loosely based on what Owsley Stanley. I'm saying his first name right. The very famous provider of acid, very associated with the Grateful Dead a lot. It's kind of a biographical, sort of loose biographical song about him. Just the guitar work. Larry Carlton. Larry Carlton is all over this. If you want some Larry Carlton guitar work, he is all over this. The guitar work in Kid Charlemagne is so good. Paul Griffin's piano and Sign in Stranger is super tasty. That talk box played on Haitian Divorce. Haitian Divorce is so good. By Dean Parks is fantastic. Green Earrings is so funky. It's funky as hell. It's a song about a jewel thief. That's what I mean. You don't get straight ahead love songs from Steely Dan. I mean, from Owsley Stanley to jewel thieves to all kinds of interesting topics. But yeah, this one I don't understand why this isn't held up as one of the greatest Steely Dan albums by more people. Again, this is one where I just love every song on here. So you guys know what is left. You know, kind of a, I don't know. It's not really a hot take, but it's a hot take for me personally because this one has never been in my number one slot until like this last week or so when I was really kind of re-listening to these, and now I get it. It just clicked. Now I do get 1977's Asia, as a lot of people hold this up as the great Steely Dan album. Although I haven't seen it uniformly on top of all lists. This, as most of you probably know, this is considered the ultimate audiophile record, right? I mean, the joke, but it's also true. For decades and kind of hi-fi stereo stores, when people come in to test the equipment and hear the speakers and all that, like the stereo salesman always put Asia on, right? Always put Asia, and yeah, but because it sounds so immaculate. The production, the playing, it's beautifully clean. It's a huge jazz influence on there. A lot of these kind of longer songs where they're really allowing some of these just amazing players to stretch out. I mean, it's the ultimate record of immaculate production, impeccable playing from these pros. God, listen to those bass lines, like in Peg, in Josie. Those bass lines are so good, so tasty. The title track, 8-minute title track, those drum breaks, kind of in the second half. When it starts off real kind of mellow, that song, right? But then when they kind of get that long instrumental break, Steve Gadd on drums, and from what I have read, what I have heard, that was the first or second take. He was hungover. He's reading the drum charts. If that's true, it's incredible. Even if it's not true, it's incredible. But Wayne Shorter on sax. I mean, it's just you crank that up, and it's an audiophile's dream. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah, and honestly, I can't think of an album uh, more so than this, where the difference between just kind of having it out in the background versus giving it a real close listen makes that much difference. I mean, if you give this the attention to listen to the playing on here, it's amazing. And the lyrics are cool too. Yeah, I haven't talked as much about the lyrics, but of course, Deacon Blues. I mean, such great lyrics on there. Yeah, but I do have at this point Asia in my number one slot. So, what do you guys think? Just kind of wrapping it up here. There's a lot of really good Steely Dan comps out there. Although, these records are such, especially these top four, I think, such kind of whole piece amongst themselves. You really want the records, but was it Showbiz Kids? I I have it on CD. I just didn't pull it out. But Showbiz Kids was a really good like 2 disc sampler. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff on there. And there's a few singles that weren't on records, like FM. FM was a great Steely Dan hit, not on one of these records because it was on a soundtrack to that film. But yeah, so on some of these hit collections, you can get a song like FM that isn't on one of these records. So you have that. Yeah, there's a lot of comps out there. I haven't really explored much of their solo stuff. I mean, Donald Fagen has released some. The only solo record I have is his solo debut, the Nightfly. Donald Fagen, the Nightfly, and I should like this more than I do because it came pretty soon on the heels of Gaucho. Definitely kind of has a lot of those session guys that are on the Steely Dan records on here. Jeff Porcaro's on here, right? Larry Carlton's on here. And, there's all kinds of well-known people on here too. And I should like it because it's kind of a loose concept record. Sort of suburbia and kind of growing up in the Cold War era, and I love that era. Like studying it, and teaching it, and all that. But I don't know. This one just hasn't grabbed me like any of those '70s Steely Dan records did. But that's the only solo work I have from either of those guys. But well, yeah, that's it. What do you guys think? I want to hear it. Let's talk Steely Dan in the comments. People have strong opinions about Steely Dan. So, did I get the ranking right? Did I get it wrong? What's your ranking? Do you like Steely Dan? Do you hate Steely Dan? Let's just talk Steely Dan. All right. Well, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time on Amity Tracks. And I don't know, I'm tossing some different ideas of what's coming next, but something's coming. All right. And hey, you know what? Springsteen's Nebraska, the Nebraska box set, was supposed to be released next week, but I saw an announcement that they put it off another week. So I think it's 2 weeks, maybe. We'll see. But Electric Nebraska is coming. All right. We'll see you guys next time on Amity Tracks.